Welcome to the Ugly Bug Podcast, a production of the Ugly Bug Fly Shop and Crazy Rainbow Fly Fishing.
Welcome to the Ugly Bug Podcast. On today's episode, we sit down and talk with Mark Melnyk, host of The New Fly Fisher, talk about his beginning into fly fishing, as well as his beginning into broadcasting, and how those two have intersected. First, let's take a quick break for a sponsor.
The Ugly Bug Podcast is proudly sponsored by Wyoming. Wyoming-rooted fly fishing apparel and accessories challenging the traditional mold, designed by anglers for anglers.
We're all good. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
And thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, obviously, you're running the New Fly Fisher, or one of the guys running the New Fly Fisher. You got an interesting story, and I guess we'll just kind of start at the beginning of, like, how'd you get into fishing? And originally, I don't know if it was as a young boy or.
Yeah. So when I was 4, my parents split up, and my dad took a job calling hockey games out west in Calgary. So left my mom in Ontario with 2 young kids and working 2 jobs. She was struggling, right? So as soon as the school year was over, she would pack my sister and I up, literally pick us up from school and drive us to Georgian Bay, which is an offshoot of one of the Great Lakes. And we would spend the summers with my grandparents. So I literally remember getting out of the vehicle, leaving my shoes in the trunk, and spending the entire summer fishing, boating, swimming. It was a very blessed opportunity. Yeah. And then when the summer was over, she'd come back, drive up to the marina, pick us up, we put our shoes back on and go to school. Literally.
Awesome.
And in that, I would fish with my grandfather.
Yeah.
Right? So Frank taught me very little about fishing, but a lot about the sport and what the sport was all about.
Yeah.
So we trolled a lot for pike, anyway. So that's where my love of fishing began. So when I was 5 years old, I remember catching my first 12-pound northern pike off the dock. And I remember calling my grandma and grandpa down saying, get the net, I got a giant. And they're like, yeah, whatever, kid, you're 5.
Right.
They come down and
So
at that point
legit.
it was on.
Yeah.
Right? It was on. So I would fish all summers up there. And then when my mom got remarried at the age of 12, we moved to a great wild brown trout and brook trout river called the Credit River in Ontario. And I saw these guys down there with these crazy fishing rods. And I said, I want to try that. So I went down and talked to one of them. He said, yeah, you need to go and buy a fly rod and all the rest. So I went to Canadian Tire, which is like a service all for everything you'd ever want to buy.
Yeah.
And I went to their sports department and I bought an 8-weight Royal Coachman for a small stream. It came with a fly line. I bought a book on how to tie flies. I tied the fly line directly to the reel, no backing. And I taught myself how to tie my first nymph. And I went down and I caught a brook trout on it.
That's awesome.
So that was my introduction to fly fishing.
Yeah.
Well, then, I went through high school, started chasing girls, drinking beer. It didn't work out so well. Went to university, started chasing girls, drinking beer. Still didn't work out very well. And then got my first job in television when I was in my final year of university at the World Nordic Games in Thunder Bay, Ontario.
Okay.
So I was a runner. I was driving scripts. I was running people back and forth from venues. I fell in love with the television industry.
Right.
And I decided at that point that's where I was going to focus my career. So the producer of the World Nordic Games and I actually hit it off. And my dad was one of the hosts, so that's how I got the job. And Tredge told me, he said, when you're done university, call me, and if I've got a position for you at TSN, which is the Canadian equivalent of ESPN,
okay,
I'll give you a job. So as soon as I graduated, I called Dave. He said, yep, come on, you're going to start doing control shows for NHL Tonight and MLB Tonight. So which means...
So was your college education in media or
no, not at all.
Broadcasting?
I was doing outdoor recreation, parks, and tourism. I wanted to start an eco-tourism business.
Okay.
So I started doing highlight packs. So when you watch the news and they do the sports packs, of the highlights of each game. I was responsible for a certain amount of games each night, depending if it was NHL or Major League Baseball.
Okay.
So fell in love with television. Worked at TSN for a number of years, got laid off, as you do in TV. Ended up starting Animal Planet in Canada. It was already established in the United States. Brought it up to Canada, worked on that for years, got laid off from that. Then went to Outdoor Life Network. And that's where I got involved in rodeo and bull riding events. So I was producing Calgary Stampede, PBR events, all this stuff. I hadn't touched a fly rod since, literally. Since I left for university, hadn't picked up a fly rod.
Were you fishing at all? Like
not as much.
No.
You know, on weekends where I'd get up to where my grandparents were, I would go out and do a little bit. And as I started making money again, a little bit of money again that I could afford to buy conventional gear, I would fish a bit. But when I was at Outdoor Life Network doing the rodeo and bull riding events, when I was available to fish, I would come back on the Mondays after a weekend and I'd have that reverse raccoon sunglass tan, right?
It happens.
Yeah. And one of the guys that I worked with notices, he's like, why do you look so goofy? It's like, well, because I'm fishing on the weekends. Well, I got laid off from Outdoor Life Network. That's the nature of television business, right? You move from network to network. It's just, especially in sports, it's a small family of people that you're always working with the same people. It's always just different networks.
Right.
The gentleman that asked me the question about the reverse raccoon sunglass eyes actually became the head of programming at the brand new network called World Fishing Network. All this to tell you that when I got laid off from Outdoor Life Network from the rodeo and bull riding scene, Corey Russell called me and said, hey, I know you love to fish. I know you're a good television producer. I want you to come and produce TV shows for me. But the trick is they can't have any fishing in them. So I was like, dude, what are you talking about? You want me to produce fishing shows without any fishing in them? He said, yeah, I want you to produce a show called The Real Road Trip, and I want you to travel all around the United States and Canada and do stories about the fishing industry. So crabbing, professional fishing tournaments, antique rod collectors, anything that you can think about in the fishing industry that isn't actually fishing, I would go to. For instance, I went to Murray, Kentucky. I went to Kentucky and I did hand grabbing for catfish, not technically fishing, right? I went and visited Bill Dance at his studios and had a tour of his place and talked to him about, why his career and stuff like that. Went and visited a guy who had the most eclectic bait caster collection in the world because he had the Kentucky bait caster, whatever kind of thing. So that's what the story, but I would always try to include, even though I was told not to, a fishing segment in that. Long story short, I started rubbing shoulders with some of the more influential anglers in our sport, be it conventional or fly fishing. And when you're traveling to all these fantastic places like the Bahamas, like Texas, like Louisiana, do you really think I'm not going to bring a fishing rod with me?
Yeah, how would you do that?
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So I slowly incorporated a fishing segment of a unique species in that show. Well, I was told in no uncertain terms to stop. I said, well, I'm not going to go to these fantastic places and not fish.
Yeah.
Right? So Corey said, fine, if that's the way you want to do it, then we're going to rip off a show called Dirty Jobs. And you're going to go and do the jobs of the fishing industry. So I said, okay. So we called that Real Jobs as a spinoff from the Real Road Trip. So anything from catching bait for chum buckets, a crabber in the North Atlantic.
Yeah.
Those jobs in the fishing industry we would go and do. So we did that for 2 seasons. And when we did that, what resonated most was when I was actually speaking with fishing guides. I did a couple of segments where the job was to be a fishing guide, whether it was a saltwater guide or a freshwater guide.
Yeah.
And those episodes skyrocketed in popularity. So Corey, being the smart television programmer that he is, said, why don't we do a show where you go and learn about fishing guides and how fishing guides got to where they are today? and we'll call that show Guided, right?
Probably some wild stories in that one.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, they're
Blake.
all over the map.
Dude, I can't pull this up, but I got goosebumps.
Right.
Like anything from Frank Willits, who owns the Pear Market River Lodge up in the UP, how he was a white collar executive with the Ford Motor Company, whose daughter told him that he loves his job more than he loves her, so he quits and buys a trout lodge, like to be with his family. Like those are the kind of stories that, and as you know, all guides, every single guide has a unique story as to where they are today.
Yeah.
So that was immensely popular. And that's where I got to fall back in love with fly fishing, because so many of the guides that I would work with doing this show were fly fishing guides. Case in point, Will Benson, friend of both of ours, permit guide in the Keys. I was there when he and his brother Jolly actually stopped big cruise lines from being able to enter Key West Harbor because of the damage they were doing to the tarpon habitat, right?
Right.
So I got to play with some of the best fly anglers in the world. My fly fishing still sucked, but it was an eye-opening world into everything fly fishing for me, and I fell back in love with it again.
Right.
But then, being in network television, I got laid off again from WFN. WFN was sold to the United States. Everything moved south. Being a Canadian, I'm not going to uproot my family and move down. Mm-hmm. So when I was with Outdoor Life Network, Colin McEwen, who started the new Fly Fisher, actually pitched his show back in the early 2000s to OLN, and my then boss greenlit that show. And she said, this is a great idea. That's when I first met Colin, back when I was at OLN.
Yeah.
Colin had heard that I had been laid off from WFN and called and said, hey, I feel bad for you. I need a host. Can you come and host a couple of episodes of the new Fly Fisher for me?
Right.
So I'd love to. So I did a season of new Fly Fisher, did 9 episodes for Colin, and then got laid off again for his daughter. His daughter needed a job, family first, all that kind of stuff. So I struggled for 3 years trying to find work. Wasn't going to give up on the fishing career. My wife and I had weekly battles about change of career. Funny story is I actually was going to go back and get my Master's of Education to become a teacher, and I had raised the money to do the 2-year course. I had all my information. I had my transcripts. I had my letters of reference. I was ready to hit enter to apply, and I hit delete. I said,
not right.
You're a TV guy.
Yeah.
Stick with TV.
Yeah.
So about 3 months after that, Colin called me, and he said, hey, I want to get back into military programming, because he's a Navy guy, right?
Right.
He used to make military shows. Would you consider, I want to sell you the new Fly Fisher television show. You're a great host for it. You know the business. You're a perfect fit. I said, Colin, what does that look like? He said, I'll just sell you the whole thing. I said, not a chance. You've been doing this for 20 years or 18 years at the time. I'm not going to buy it and take it away from you and not have you be a part of it. I said, no way. 3 months later, he called back and he said, what if we go 50-50? I said, now you're talking my game. Mm-hmm. And back in, this is our 6th season together. So, 6 years ago, we signed a contract together and we've become 50-50 partners, and it's been fantastic ever since. And that's how you and I got to meet. Yeah.
Your guys' show is a unique spin in that, to me, it incorporates the right amount of, like, for lack of better terminology, fish porn, right? Like cool, badass fishing, but yet an educational component that a lot of others don't feature, right? Where you're on the water education, and obviously some of that it's included Tom Rosenbauer and that sort of thing, but you guys put a focus on like becoming a better angler instead of just showing like this sort of Hollywood version of like, I go experience badass fishing. You're actually teaching people how to become better anglers, which I think is for me is a diamond in the rough sort of thing, right? It's a real rarity.
Absolutely,
in today's
absolutely.
Industry.
One of the things as a professional guide yourself, one of the things that I would assume would drive you crazy is if somebody comes onto your body of water that you're so intimate with and thinks that they can fish it.
Yeah.
Right? Every single guide on the North Platte River fishes it differently. Every single guide that fishes Tarpon Key flats for permit fishes it differently. As an angler, I'm doing myself a disservice if I don't go into every situation as a newbie, as somebody that that may be well fished for a certain species, but the first year you and I fished the North Platte together, I went in believing that I had never fly fished for trout. Well, I hadn't fished for trout here before.
Yeah.
And that's the genesis of Colin's belief in the sport, is that you're always learning, no matter how great a stick you are. Every guide you fish with has something to teach you. And the day that you don't learn something when you're on the water, you might as well quit. You might as well just break your rods in half and quit right there.
Yeah.
So that was the genesis of the show. So education is key. Conservation is key in the show. Education is key in the show. And the fact that we have the videography team that we have who understand the sport allows us to be able to effectively tell those stories and teach through. It's not the hosts that teach people tips and techniques in the show. It's the guides, right? It's the people that we fish with that are the stars, that are the avenue of education for what we do. And I believe, and thank you for saying so, but I believe that that's why the formula has been so successful.
Yeah, I think you guys are unique in the sense that, like, you're lean and mean. You run a badass team, right? You're cruising with Ryan, a badass videographer. Flies drone. He can do everything, right? Yeah. And watching him work, he's just so efficient, right? Yeah. He doesn't miss anything, right?
Yeah.
And as a one-man crew to not miss, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to do kind of multiple shows throughout the years, right? And I've been everything from, like, me guiding and 3 support boats to basically capture the same sort of content that you're capturing with one super efficient badass guy behind the lens, right?
Yeah, and it's been a journey to get there. And we've got Ryan Pizzacalla, we've got Jeremy Kennedy, who has been with us now 20 years. We've got Brett Colpitz. And we've got a new guy coming on named Daniel Notriani. And we work hard to find those guys. And yes, they're camera people first. And it helps that they understand the sport. But I can put hand to heart and tell you that Jeremy has never cast a fly rod in his life. And he doesn't want to. Because his job in the show is to do what his job is in the show, and he's afraid that if he picks up a fly rod and experiences what the joy that we have and the love that he'll just want to fly fish the whole time.
Position. I understand it.
Right?
It's one reason I don't play golf, right? I'm worried that I would like it and then just become addicted and be like, shit, my career is blown. I gotta move to golf. Right? Yeah.
So it's a situation where we, as business partners, Colin and I, look after our guys in such a way that they want to continue to better their craft. And, Ryan's been with us for 5 years, and I've seen him grow from a guy right out of school that just has pure passion to a true professional. And again, I've been in the television business now since 1996. I've seen a lot of very, very talented people. And in the outdoor space, I believe we've got 4 of the best.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So if we step forward, like, you guys are obviously have a very strong hold in YouTube, a very strong following there that is continuing to grow. Your social media presence, like, future forward for the company, is it more streaming service based, or is that just a year-to-year thing? Like, it's always intrigued me of how does that come about, right? To know, like, how did contracts come up? Obviously, YouTube you can plan for. The other stuff, to me, is like, who knows where it goes, right? You've discussed your multiple layoffs and that sort of thing throughout the industry, and the uncertainty of that has always intrigued me.
So what's interesting about what we do, being a Canadian broadcaster, a Canadian production company, is there's certain rules and regulations that we have to go by to be able to be on television. And television will always be our base. No matter the state of TV and how many people are watching television, how many people are not watching television, TV will always be our base. That's just the way our broadcast system works. Mm-hmm. But we do have the opportunity to do streaming events. I don't mean streaming events, I mean streaming services. And the way that things are going today is they're changing literally weekly. Mm-hmm. So you ask a very good question. We see avenues such as Pluto TV, Roku, Hulu, and we have a distributor who just got back from France working on our distribution strategy, who has got a pile of others that are internationally based that are interested in fly fishing content.
Right.
So it's not something that Colin and I can do on our own. It's an entirely different monster. It's like a social media monster. Mm-hmm. I know that you've got CC and yourself and Addie that work really diligently to put out great social media content. And you know the amount of work that needs to go into it. It's a full-time gig. It's the same with distribution. In order to get our product around the world, we can't do it. Mm-hmm. So we hire a company who does it, and we work with a wonderful lady that is an expert at it. She gets the outdoor space, and she's willing to fly around the world and represent us to make sure that people in New Zealand know about the ugly bug, that people in Finland know about the ugly bug. Again, television is the base. Mm-hmm. So she'll go and sell TV. We just launched X amount of episodes in New Zealand, right? Which is a huge win on television, right? But once we get that base, then we can move on to the streaming services in those regions, and there's an appetite for them. So with the advent of all of these different things happening all the time, the footprint of the new fly fisher is going to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, and partners such as yourself are only going to benefit from it.
Yeah.
That's the plan.
We've seen a huge, the trend with like younger individuals, using streaming services to watch the content they want versus, searching for it, right? They can look it up on YouTube or whatever. The content there, and then obviously the kind of anticipation of a cool fishing trip, right? When someone books or is looking into it, they're doing research, and I'm such like a horrible mechanic, right? I looked up, fix the door latch, and first thing I do is go to YouTube and type it in, and there's some guy that explains how to fix a door latch. So I assume a bunch of your followers, we've been fortunate enough to be part of some events on how to streamer fish, how to nymph fish, right? And those sort of educational points, like obviously they put us in front of multiple people, but the educational component is a unique one, because you guys, to me, you just approach it a different way. But the aspect of growth is fascinating to me, because, even us doing this, right, 7 years ago, thinking about launching a podcast was like nowhere near my radar. Right. And the wheel turns so fast on what's new between all the different services and, things like TikTok, the way they've just taken over.
Yeah.
It obviously doesn't fit some of our markets, right? But we can all recognize it gets a shitload of viewership.
It totally does. And YouTube is vital to what we do for the new fly fisher and for partners such as the Ugly Bug or tourism or whoever it may be.
Right.
What we do, Blake, is because YouTube is the way it is designed the way it is, and because we have our base of television, right? Our TV base is a set time. That show has to be delivered at 23 minutes long. Mm-hmm. YouTube removes those shackles of oppression. Right. So the show that we're shooting right now could be anywhere from 40 minutes to 2 hours, depending on the content and what naturally and organically the length of the show tells us that it needs to be, without getting boring, without repeating anything, without any of that stuff.
Right.
So YouTube actually gives us a platform that's more like a movie theater than it is a television station.
Interesting way to look at it, yeah.
Right. And then what we do is when we're in the field, we shoot extra content well, you know this, we've been doing it for a couple of days now. We shoot extra content that either lives in the show or it gets cut to the cutting room floor and gets revived as its own 3-minute segment on how to set up an effective a Wyoming 3-fly nymph rig,
right,
kind of thing, where people will search, and all of a sudden the algorithm puts us up there, and everybody wins.
Right.
So the more education that we can create for fly anglers, the better off everybody is. After all, we are called the new fly fisher, and we're never going to change that, because every fly fisher on every stream, on every lake with a different guide is, in my opinion, a new fly fisher.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, you all start somewhere.
Yeah.
And if you're smart, you never quit learning.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. So switching a little bit, I'm sure, I'm always intrigued on like the one, obviously there's probably multiple bucket list places you would love to go, right? But content you haven't captured that you really strive to capture, species-based or location-based, is there anything you can think of off the top of your head?
That's a great question, and I get asked that question a lot. I think after our conversation today in the boat about giant trevallies is a big one for me. Not only GTs, but all the superfluous species that come along with fishing those flats, box puffer fishes, and I think they're the most hilarious fish that swims in the ocean.
Right. Yeah. Mustache triggers, right?
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
goofy,
Triggerfish.
Yeah.
I fell in love with permit fishing. I was fortunate enough to have a fantastic guide out of Blackfly Lodge in the Bahamas who gave me a shot at the first permit that I had ever seen, and I managed to hook it and land it. I fell in love with that, and I haven't hooked one since. I fell in love with that challenge, and as I get further along in my fly fishing career, it's about the hunt for me.
Sure.
I want to catch a 50-inch muskie on fly. I want to catch a XYZ that is, you may have to spend a week to get a shot. I want to hunt a fish and be able to meet it and release it. That's kind of where I'm at in my career. It's about the process, it's about the people, and it's about maybe getting there or maybe not.
Yeah.
I still look at a successful fishing trip as not catching not realizing your goal, because that just fuels the fire to come back and try to realize it again.
Sure.
So,
how about the most memorable show? Like the one, I think, we obviously always have odds and ends that certain anglers remember, and it's not necessarily like the biggest fish but the one, like when you think of like that was the episode. Is it a family event? I know you've had the pleasure to fish with your son in certain locations, or a cool species. What's the one that like tops the sort of list of something you've been able to do? You've been so many cool places, but
I think in freshwater, I think the first big brook trout that I ever caught, I was fortunate enough to do a show up at a place called Miminisca Lodge up in the Albany River system, and I had a great Aboriginal Canadian guide named Joe Boyce, and he tied on a streamer on this. We had to fly in. It was a 10-minute float plane ride in, and then an hour canoe ride to the first run. And I cast a streamer out in a riffle and started stripping it back, and it got eaten. And I brought this fish to hand, and it was a 6-pound brook trout. And I'd only ever caught brook trout this big. And I looked at Joe and I said, "Joe, this is a fucking brook trout?" And it would look like a football.
Right.
And it was in July, but it was colored up like spawn colors. It was fire red and green mottled, and those halo spots. It was moving. And he looked at me and said, "Yeah, that's a good one." No, he said, "That's a pretty good one." He said, "They come bigger." And I went, "Are you kidding me?" And that fish was super, super special to me, not only because it was the first big brook trout I'd ever caught, but it was the whole situation of being with an Ojibwe guide and watching him, smudge with cedar before and tobacco offering, and it was just one of those special moments for me. Yeah. On the saltwater side, it wasn't a fly fishing event. It was while we were shooting guided, and we were off the coast of Antigonish, Nova Scotia, chunking for bluefin tuna, and we had a 75-year-old client on the boat, and I was feeding a live mackerel on a circle hook with 130 class gear. And I saw this tuna come up and eat this mackerel, and I fed him, and then I came tight. And then the smoke, I didn't have gloves on. I had to let go. The smoke happened. This thing took off. And it was a 950-pound bluefin that we brought to the side of the boat, and it was absolutely soul-stirring. So yeah, those two fish stand out in my mind as some of the more incredible.
Yeah. We've had some unique conversation over the past couple of days, and one I've really enjoyed was, you'd kind of asked me about, does this get old, right, rowing a boat and doing it for the time I have, and I think we both kind of laid it on the same thing, that the thing that makes this industry unique is the people, right? And the people you meet, the people that become friends, and you kind of share this common thread of the sport and the love for the sport and the love for the outdoors. I'm sure you can speak to that a little bit about just the amazing folks you've met over the years, that it not only like become a cool fishing contact, but really become part of your life, right? They become friends and like long-term people Yeah.
I mean, case in point, you and I met 4 or 5 years ago, and I have no problem picking up the phone and to bullshit. Right. And that's kind of what I find happens on a drift boat or on a flat or a walk and wade when you're with somebody of a like-minded philosophy about what you're doing, is you immediately cut through all the junk that you have to talk about to get to the good stuff.
Yeah.
You know exactly what you want. You know who this person is without even knowing them right out of the gate, really. And you can talk about what's important to. You don't have to pussyfoot around to get into a deep conversation with somebody in this industry, right? It's so many people, whether they're guides or well-fished anglers or even new anglers that are wanting to do it, the conversation comes easy. And when conversation comes easy, there's no work. You don't have to put anything on. You don't have to try, right? It's just something that is natural. And I find in the fly fishing industry, I've never fished with a guide that, or another angler that we didn't get along famously with. And I'd like to say that's because we're awesome people, but I think that's because of the sport. I think that's because of who the sport attracts, right? Sure. And that sounds corny and wishy-washy, but it's been my experience for the last 10 years that's
no. I think the ones that are assholes, they wash out.
Absolutely,
right? They're there for 18 months, and it's like, I'm moving on and going to join Wall Street or whatever it may be, right? Yep. They realize that it doesn't really hit home. It's not in their blood, right? And if it's not in your blood, to be honest, it's a miserable job, right? Yeah. You're dealing with shit like we dealt with today, where it's nuking 50 miles an hour, and you don't want to be out there.
It goes from from 60 degrees to freezing in a wind gust,
right?
And you're like, you want to keep fishing? Fuck yeah, I want to keep fishing.
We're here, of course. Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, appreciate it, and look forward to the next couple of days of filming.
Yeah, we're gonna have fun, aren't we?
Awesome. Thank you.
Next point.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to the Ugly Bug Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you have questions or feedback, reach out to us via email at info@uglybugpodcast.com or leave a comment on our social networks.